What about my share of the rent? Mary asks. In most brothels, workers either split their earnings with the house or paid daily or weekly rent for their rooms. We'll work it out, Madame Rosie says with finality. Rest now, that's an order. As Mary is helped upstairs, Lily pulls a small wooden box from beneath a floorboard in the corner, another of the hiding places that dotted the house. Time for protection, she announces. The box contains an assortment of items that represented the limited methods available for preventing disease and pregnancy. Small squares of linen to be used as makeshift barriers, tins of various powders and ointments of dubious effectiveness, and dried herbs for making preventative teas. Got something new, Jenny says, pulling a small rubber object from her pocket. Travelling salesman had them. Cost me a day's earnings. It's a primitive version of a female condom, a technological advancement that would have been rare and expensive in this era. The women examine it with mixed expressions of hope and skepticism. Does it work? Sarah asks, turning the object in her hands. Jenny shrugs. Better than nothing, I figure. This casual exchange highlights a crucial reality of brothel life. Women shared information, resources, and protective methods in a communal effort to stay healthy. Long before formal sex education or healthcare access, this informal knowledge network was often their only defense against disease. I still say the vinegar wash is most reliable, Lily insists, referring to the practice of douching with vinegar solutions after intercourse, a method that provided some limited protection against both pregnancy and certain infections. Burns like hellfire, though, Sarah counters with a grimace. Better than what happened to Mary, Lily says simply. No one argues with this logic. The conversation turns to other protective measures, not just against disease, but against the various dangers that came with the profession. Mina tried to steal my earrings last night, Jenny says, touching the simple gold hoops she wears. Thought I was asleep after. Show them what you did, Madame Rosie encourages, a hint of pride in her voice. Jenny grins and pulls up her skirt a few inches to reveal a small knife strapped to her garter. Didn't have to use it, just showed it to him and he suddenly remembered his manners. Self-defense was a necessary skill for women in the sporting life. While madams like Rosie provided some protection, each woman ultimately had to look out for herself against violent or thieving customers. Good, Madame Rosie nods, but remember, pulling a knife is a last resort. Better to read a man before he gets dangerous. She moves to the bar and pours small glasses of whiskey, not the watered-down variety served to customers, but the real thing, kept for medicinal and ceremonial purposes. To staying healthy, she says, raising her glass in a toast that carries more weight than casual observers might recognize. You all drink, the whiskey burning a warm path to your stomachs. It's a rare moment of solidarity and shared purpose. Women united not just by circumstance, but by the common goal of survival in a hazardous profession. The peaceful moment is interrupted by Jim, returning from an errand in town with news. There's talk of a hygiene ordinance, he reports. Town council's considering it. Weekly doctor checks, mandatory. This news sends a ripple of concern through the room. While the Silver Queen already maintained voluntary medical examinations, government-mandated checks often came with registration requirements, fees, and potential legal complications. Who's pushing it? Madame Rosie asks sharply. New doctor in town, Jim replies. Young fellow with big ideas about public health. Got the minister's wife on his side. Madame Rosie's expression darkens. That woman lost 3 customers to her temperance meetings last month. The complex relationship between brothels and public health initiatives was rarely simple. While basic hygiene measures benefited everyone, regulations were often used as tools to control or eliminate prostitution rather than protect the women involved. "What'll we do if it passes?" Sarah asks. "Same as always," Madame Rosie says with a shrug. "Adapt. Pay the fees. Find the loopholes." This pragmatic approach to changing regulations was typical of successful madams who treated legal obstacles as business challenges rather than moral judgments. "Speaking of adapting," Jim says, reaching into his coat, "got something else you should see." He unfolds a newspaper named not the local Virginia City paper, but one from San Francisco, several weeks old. He points to a small article describing a new treatment for venereal diseases being tested in Europe. "Mightn't help Mary now," he says, "but worth knowing about." The women crowd around, reading with interest. Information about medical advances spread slowly to frontier communities, and those that did arrive were often mixed with snake oil claims and outright frauds. Still, they absorbed every piece of potentially useful knowledge. Says here they're using something called silver salts. Lily reads slowly, her finger tracing the words. Her literacy, like that of many prostitutes, is basic but functional. Another survival skill in a world where contracts and business arrangements were increasingly written rather than verbal. "I'll write to my cousin in San Francisco," Madame Rosie decides, "see if she can find out more." This network of information exchange between brothels in different cities was yet another layer of the health protection system that prostitutes developed. Letters between madams often contained not just business news, but details about treatments, preventative measures, and warnings about dangerous remedies. As evening approaches, the house begins its transformation from daytime sanctuary to nighttime business. The piano player arrives, lamps are lit, and fresh sawdust is scattered on the floor to absorb spills and mask odours. "Time to get ready," Madame Rosie announces. The preparation ritual includes not just cosmetics and clothing changes, but health precautions. Each woman tucks small cloths into accessible pockets for quick cleanups between customers. Jenny carefully straps her knife to her thigh. Sarah drinks a bitter-smelling tea made from the preventative herbs in Lily's box. "Don't forget these," Madame Rosie says, distributing small vials of carbolic acid solution, a primitive antiseptic that served as a disinfectant wash. The smell is harsh, medicinal, nothing like the gentle soaps you're used to at home. Upstairs, Mary rests in Madame Rosie's room, her face pale against the pillows. "You stopped by briefly to check on her. Brought you some broth," you say, setting a cup on the bedside table. "Thanks." Her voice is weak, her forehead damp with sweat. The early stages of treatment were often worse than the disease itself, as toxic mercury compounds worked their way through the body. "Need anything else?" She shakes her head slightly. "Just don't tell the others how bad it is. Don't want them worrying." This concern for her fellow workers, even while suffering, illustrates the bonds that formed in these environments. Despite popular portrayals of prostitutes as strictly competitive, many houses developed strong internal support systems, women looking out for each other when no one else would. "Rest," you tell her, touching her hand briefly. "We've got things covered downstairs." The evening begins as customers start arriving, miners fresh from their shifts, businessmen claiming to be just passing by, cowboys with trail dust still on their boots, the usual mix of humanity seeking various forms of escape. You work the room with practiced ease, laughing at jokes you've heard 100 times, deflecting unwanted advances with gentle skill, steering potential customers toward transaction without explicit discussion, all while maintaining an almost subconscious vigilance for signs of trouble. A miner at the bar coughs repeatedly into his bandana, which comes away spotted with blood. You catch Sarah's eye across the room and make a subtle gesture. She nods, understanding the warning. Tuberculosis was as feared as venereal disease, perhaps more so for being easier to contract through casual contact. Sarah approaches the bar near the miner. "Jim," she says loudly enough for the man to hear, "Madame Rosie said we're not serving anyone who's sick tonight. Doctor's orders after what happened last month." The miner takes the hint, finishing his drink quickly before departing. No confrontation, no accusation, just a clear boundary established and respected. This delicate enforcement of health standards was part of survival in a profession where illness could spread rapidly through a house. As the night deepens, you find yourself in conversation with a well-dressed stranger, not a local, judging by his clothes and manner. He's polite, seemingly educated, and interested in more than just the obvious services. "I'm a physician from Philadelphia," he explains after some general conversation, "studying disease patterns in mining communities." You maintain your professional smile while mentally assessing the risk. He could be legitimate. Medical researchers did occasionally venture west, though rarely to brothels, or he could be lying to gain information or access. "Fascinating work," you reply noncommittally. "Must keep you busy." "Indeed. I'm particularly interested in preventative measures employed in establishments like this one," he continues, leaning forward slightly. "Purely academic interest, I assure you." You've heard variations of purely academic interest before, usually from men seeking details they found titillating rather than educational. Still, genuine medical knowledge was valuable enough to warrant careful consideration. "You should speak with Madame Rosie about that," you suggest, nodding toward her impressive figure at the far end of the room. "She handles all matters of house policy." The deflection is smooth, practiced, neither rejection nor acceptance, simply transferring the decision to higher authority. It's one of countless small protective strategies developed through experience. The doctor does approach Madame Rosie later in the evening. Their conversation lasts nearly an hour, heads bent together in the corner. When he finally leaves, she gathers the women briefly during a lull in business. "That man had some useful information," she tells you all. "New treatments being tested back east. I've written it all down for Doc Simmons to review." This exchange of medical knowledge, flowing from formal institutions to the informal networks of brothel workers, was an unrecognized but vital channel for health information in the developing West. Women in the sporting life were often more knowledgeable about certain aspects of sexual health than many formally trained physicians, having learned through hard-won experience. The night wears on. You serve drinks, entertain customers, occasionally disappear upstairs for brief business-like encounters that bear little resemblance to the passionate romances depicted in fictional accounts of brothel life. Between customers, you perform small protective rituals, washing quickly with the carbolic solution, checking for any signs of trouble, taking small sips of the preventative tea that tastes of herbs and bitter determination. In the quietest hour before dawn, when only a few dedicated drinkers remain at the bar, you find yourself sitting with Sarah and Lily in a corner, feet aching, counting the night's earnings. "Not bad," Lily says, stacking coins into neat piles, "enough to put a little aside." "For what?" asks Sarah. "Your dress shop or mine?" It's a running joke between them, these dreams of escape that seem simultaneously within reach and impossibly distant. "For medicine, more likely," Lily says, her usual humour faltering as she glances toward the stairs where Mary rests. "Never know when you'll need it." The comment hangs in the air, a stark reminder of the health realities that shaped every aspect of brothel life. Dreams might sustain the spirit, but practical considerations, medicine, doctor's fees, savings for periods of illness, governed daily decisions. To staying healthy, Sarah says, raising her glass in an echo of Madame Rosie's earlier toast. To staying healthy, you and Lily repeat. In that moment, the clink of your glasses carries the weight of shared understanding that in this life, health wasn't just about physical well-being, but about economic survival, about maintaining the precarious independence that brought many women to this profession in the first place. Outside, the eastern sky begins to lighten. Another night has passed at the Silver Queen. The women have laughed and lied, protected themselves and each other, navigated the dangers both visible and microscopic that threatened their livelihood and lives. As the last customer is ushered out and the doors locked for the day, there's a collective exhale. Another night survived, another day to rest and recover before it all begins again. You head upstairs, pausing to check on Mary once more. She's sleeping now, her breathing steadier. Whether from genuine improvement or simply exhaustion is impossible to tell. In your shared room, Sarah is already undressing, her movements mechanical with fatigue. "Think I'll use some of that carbolic solution again before bed," she murmurs. "Extra precaution." "Good idea," you agree, reaching for your own vial. This final cleansing ritual before sleep, another layer of protection, another small act of self-preservation, underscores the constant vigilance required in a profession where health risks were omnipresent and effective treatments scarce. As you finally sink into bed, your body aching with the night's exertions, you find yourself contemplating the complex health ecosystem of the Wild West brothel, not just the disease and dangers, but the ingenious protective measures, the information networks, the communal care systems that developed in response. These women, excluded from respectable society and its resources, created their own healthcare systems out of necessity and shared wisdom. They adapted, innovated, and protected themselves and each other as best they could with limited tools and knowledge. Sleep comes quickly, dreamless, and deep. Your last conscious thought is a simple gratitude for the clean bedding beneath you, the roof above, and the knowledge that for tonight at least you remain among the healthy and working. Unlike Mary, whose future hangs in a precarious balance between recovery and decline, unlike countless others whose names history has forgotten, women who faced the same health challenges without the relative security of an established house like the Silver Queen. Tomorrow will bring its own concerns, more customers, more risks, more protective measures. But for now, in the quiet morning hours, there is only rest and the momentary peace it brings. The late afternoon sun casts long shadows through the windows of the Silver Queen, illuminating dust motes that dance in the golden light. It's the quiet hour, that liminal space between day and evening when the brothel transitions from private sanctuary to public business. In this moment of calm, Madame Rosie sits at a small desk in the corner of the saloon, ledger open before her, spectacles perched on her nose as she carefully tallies figures. This scene, rarely depicted in romanticized portrayals of Wild West brothels, reveals one of the most significant aspects of the sporting life, its fundamental nature as a business enterprise, with all the economic complexities that entailed. "Girls," Madame Rosie calls, her voice carrying up the stairs. "Accounting time." The women descend one by one, some still drowsy from daytime sleep, others freshly washed in preparation for the evening ahead. They gather around the desk with an air of expectancy that has nothing to do with the performances they'll put on for customers later. This is genuine interest. Their livelihoods are recorded in that leather-bound book. "Good week overall," Madame Rosie announces, turning the ledger so everyone can see the neat columns of figures. "Up 15% from last month." Unlike the stereotypical image of the madam keeping her girls in ignorance and debt, many successful brothel operators like Rosie ran relatively transparent financial systems. The women knew what they earned, what they owed, and what they could expect to keep. "Sarah, you're up by nearly $20, Madame Rosie notes with approval. That cattle broker must have really taken a shine to you." Sarah allows herself a small smile of professional pride. In the complex economy of a brothel, regular clients who developed preferences for specific women were valuable assets, reliable income in an otherwise unpredictable business. "Monthly expenses," Madame Rosie continues, flipping to another page. "Rent to Mr. Holcomb, $5 a week, so $20 for the month. Liquor bill from Thompson's, $42 and change. Wood and coal, $15. Water delivery, $8. Piano player's wages, $12. These mundane operational costs were the foundation of brothel economics, the fixed expenses that had to be covered before anyone made a profit. They were substantial, especially in remote mining towns where goods and services commanded premium prices. "Dr. Simmons, $25 for the month," she adds, "plus extra for Mary's treatment." Healthcare was another significant expense in the brothel economy, both preventative examinations and treatments for the various ailments that plagued workers in the profession. Unlike modern businesses with health insurance, these costs came directly from the house's earnings or the women's personal savings. "Protection money?" Lily asks bluntly, referring to the unofficial payments made to law enforcement to avoid harassment or arrest. $15 to Marshal Davis, Madame Rosie confirms, and another $10 to Deputy Wilson. This aspect of brothel finances was universal across the West, regular payments to authorities who publicly condemned vice while privately profiting from it. In some towns, these payments were formalized as fines that amounted to business licenses. In others, they remained under-the-table arrangements. "What about the new marshal?" Sarah asks, referring to the threat discussed earlier. "Being handled," Madame Rosie says with finality. "Mr. Finch at the bank is seeing to it." The economics of a Wild West brothel extended beyond its walls into a web of community relationships. Powerful men who publicly maintained respectable facades while privately patronizing establishments like the Silver Queen often served as unofficial protectors, using their influence to shield their preferred houses from legal troubles. "Now for your shares," Madame Rosie says, turning to another page. The division of earnings varied widely between establishments. In some houses, women were essentially employees receiving a percentage of their earnings. In others, they were more like independent contractors paying rent for their rooms and keeping the rest. "Same arrangement as always," she explains for your benefit as the newest addition to the house. "House takes 40%, you keep 60%. Out of your share comes board, laundry and personal expenses. What's left is yours to save or spend as you please." This split was actually favourable compared to many brothels, where workers might keep as little as 50% or even less of their earnings. Madame Rosie's relatively fair terms explained the loyalty of her girls and the house's reputation for quality. "Jenny, $128 this month, so your share is 76 and change." Madame Rosie counts out bills and coins, pushing them across the desk. "Board is 15, laundry 3. That leaves you $58 clear." Jenny receives her earnings with practiced nonchalance, but you notice how carefully she counts the money before tucking it away. $58 was a substantial sum in the 1870s, more than many skilled labourers earned in a month. The financial reality of prostitution was that despite its dangers and social costs, it often paid better than any other work available to women. "What about Mary's share?" Sarah asks, glancing toward the stairs where Mary still rests, recovering from her illness. "Half pay during recovery," Madame Rosie states. "House rules. This policy continuing to provide some income during periods of illness or injury. One by one, each woman receives her earnings. When your turn comes, you accept the small stack of bills and coins with a mixture of pride and resignation. The money represents both freedom and its cost, the ability to support yourself independently, and the price paid for that independence. Don't forget to put something aside," Madame Rosie advises as she closes the ledger. "Never know when you'll need a nest egg." This common refrain in brothel life reflected a harsh reality. The career of a soiled dove was typically short, ended by disease, violence, addiction, or simply aging out of customer preference. Smart workers saved aggressively, hoping to accumulate enough to escape the profession before it claimed them. "Speaking of saving," Jim interjects, approaching the desk with an envelope, "Land Office notice came today." Madame Rosie takes the envelope, her expression betraying unusual excitement as she reads its contents. "It's done," she announces. "Deeds registered. The plot on C Street is officially mine." This revelation highlights another economic aspect of brothel life often overlooked in historical accounts: property investment. Successful madams frequently channeled their earnings into real estate, using these tangible assets to secure their futures when their working days ended. "Going to build that new place after all?" Lily asks. "Come spring," Madame Rosie confirms. 2 stories, 10 rooms, proper plumbing. The women exchange glances, clearly visualizing this step up from their current accommodations. Indoor plumbing was a luxury in 1870s mining towns, available only in the newest and most expensive buildings. "You'll all have a place there," Madame Rosie assures them, "assuming you stay out of trouble and keep bringing in the business." This planned expansion represents the business acumen that characterized many successful madams. They weren't simply managers of vice, but entrepreneurs who reinvested profits, expanded operations, and built legitimate business empires that sometimes extended far beyond the sex trade. As if on cue, the front door opens to admit a well-dressed woman who looks decidedly out of place in a brothel. The women tense instinctively. Respectable ladies rarely entered establishments like the Silver Queen, and when they did, it usually meant trouble. "Mrs. Peterson," Madame Rosie greets the visitor with cautious formality. "What brings you to my establishment?" The visitor, perhaps 40 years old and wearing an expensive dress that marks her as a member of Virginia City's elite, appears uncomfortable but determined. "Business, Miss Rosie," she replies stiffly. "Regarding the millinery shop?" This cryptic exchange piques everyone's interest. Madame Rosie gestures toward her private office at the back of the building. "Let's discuss it in private." After they disappear behind the closed door, speculation erupts among the women. "Millinery shop?" Jenny asks, confused. "Rosie owns it," Lily explains in a low voice, "or at least half of it. Set it up for a girl who left the life a few years back." This revelation adds another layer to the economic picture: diversification into legitimate businesses. Many madams use their brothel earnings to establish or invest in conventional enterprises, both as additional income streams and as vehicles for eventual transition out of the sex trade. "Smart," Sarah comments. "Hat shop's respectable. Nobody questions a woman running it." The economic options for women in the 1870s West were severely limited. Teaching, nursing, and domestic service were among the few respectable occupations, all paying far less than prostitution. Retail businesses like millinery shops represented a middle ground, respectable but accessible to women with the capital to establish them. When Madame Rosie emerges from her office 30 minutes later, her expression gives nothing away. Mrs. Peterson departs quickly, nodding stiffly to the women as she passes. Investment opportunity, Madame Rosie explains briefly. Nothing for you girls to worry about. The dismissal is clear. Some business matters remain the madam's private concern. This hierarchical structure, with the madam controlling overall finances while allowing workers certain economic freedoms, defined most brothel operations. As evening approaches, the Silver Queen begins its transformation from private dwelling to public business. The piano player arrives, lamps are lit, and glasses are arranged behind the bar in neat rows. "Nearly time," Madame Rosie announces. "Get yourselves ready." The preparation rituals include not just physical readiness but financial considerations. Each woman secures her accumulated savings in various hiding places, some under floorboards, others in hollowed-out books, or secret compartments in trunks. Trust in banks was limited in an era of frequent financial panics, and women in the sporting life often preferred keeping their money where they could see it. "Got something for you," Sarah says quietly, slipping you a small cloth pouch. "For your savings." Inside is a tin container, the kind that once held hard candies, now repurposed as a secure money box. It's small enough to hide easily, but large enough to hold a considerable sum when filled. "Had it made special," she explains. "False bottom. Hide the big bills underneath. Keep small change on top. If anyone finds it, they'll take the visible money and might not check further." This pragmatic approach to financial security, assuming theft attempts rather than hoping to prevent them entirely, was typical of women who learned through experience that trust was a luxury they couldn't always afford. "Thank you," you say, recognizing the gift as both practical assistance and a gesture of acceptance. "Been where you are," Sarah replies simply. "First months are hardest, gets easier." The economic journey of a brothel worker typically followed a pattern: initial months of establishing regular customers and learning the business, followed by a period of peak earnings, eventually declining as youth faded or health issues emerged. The smartest women maximized their earnings during their prime years, saving aggressively for inevitable decline. The first customers of the evening begin arriving as dusk falls. Miners from the day shift, their faces still bearing traces of silver dust despite attempts to clean up. They order whiskey at the bar, eyeing the women with varying degrees of subtlety. "Remember," Madame Rosie murmurs as she passes, "quality over quantity. One good customer pays better than 3 cheap ones." This business strategy distinguished better houses like the Silver Queen from the cribs at the edges of town, where volume of customers took precedence over quality of experience. Madame Rosie cultivated a clientele willing to pay premium prices, allowing her women to work less while earning more. The evening progresses with the familiar rhythm of the trade. You move through the room with practiced ease, engaging in conversation designed to encourage drink purchases and eventual negotiation for more intimate services. A well-dressed stranger catches your eye. Clearly not a miner or cowboy, but perhaps a businessman passing through. These transient customers, often from larger cities with more disposable income, were particularly valued in the brothel economy. "Buy you a drink?" he offers when you approach. "Love one," you reply with the practiced smile that's become second nature. The business transaction that follows is conducted in the coded language of the profession, nothing so crass as direct negotiation of services and prices. But a mutual understanding reached through euphemism and suggestion. "Might you be available for a private conversation upstairs?" he eventually asks, the standard formula in establishments like the Silver Queen. "I believe I could make time," you respond in kind, "for the right company." The price is communicated with similar indirection, references to proper appreciation and generous nature, establishing expectations without explicit discussion. This social dance, with its pretense of spontaneous attraction rather than commercial exchange, was part of the experience customers paid for. Once agreement is reached, payment is handled discreetly. Unlike modern transactions with credit cards and receipts, brothel economics operated on cash, often paid in advance to prevent disputes afterward. The business aspect of the encounter itself is efficiently managed, services rendered according to unspoken agreement, time kept within established limits, additional requests subject to additional charges. The emotional labor of feigning interest and enthusiasm is as much part of the transaction as physical acts. Afterward, you follow the house procedure for accounting, a portion of the earnings immediately set aside for Madame Rosie to be formally recorded in the ledger tomorrow. The remainder you secure in Sarah's gift, the tin box hidden beneath a loose floorboard under your bed. The night continues in this pattern, business transactions disguised as social interactions, each with its own negotiation, performance, and settlement. By the time the last customer departs near dawn, the economic machinery of the brothel has processed hundreds of dollars through dozens of individual exchanges. "Good night," Madame Rosie pronounces as Jim locks the door behind the final departing client. "Everybody paid their share?" Each woman confirms her accounting, the day's earnings now distributed between housecut and personal holdings. This daily settlement prevented disputes and ensured the house maintained its operating capital. "That businessman from Sacramento," Lily remarks as you all gather for a brief unwinding before sleep. "He left his card, says he'll be back next month." This information is noted with approval. Regular visitors, even infrequent ones, represented reliable income in an unpredictable business. Their preferences would be remembered, their return anticipated. "Mary's looking better," Sarah reports, having checked on the sick woman earlier. "Doctor says she might be back on her feet in a week." This good news has economic implications beyond simple concern for a colleague. Mary's recovery means return to full staffing, more comprehensive service offerings, and greater overall house earnings. "What about that new place on D Street?" Jenny asks as conversation flows. "Heard they're charging less than we do." "And offering less," Madame Rosie responds firmly. "Quality has its price. We're not competing with cribs." This market positioning, premium service at premium prices, was a deliberate business strategy. The Silver Queen catered to customers who could afford to pay for better surroundings, healthier women, and more sophisticated entertainment than found in cheaper establishments. "I'm saving for a sewing machine," Jenny says suddenly, changing the subject. "Singer makes one for $20. Figure I could make some extra taking in mending during slow times." This entrepreneurial thinking, developing secondary income streams, was common among forward-thinking brothel workers. Many supplemented their earnings with side businesses ranging from dressmaking to fortune-telling, building skills that might eventually provide an exit from the sporting life. "Smart girl," Madame Rosie approves. "Always good to have options." As the conversation winds down and exhaustion takes its toll, the women drift upstairs to their beds. Economic concerns follow them even into sleep. Dreams of savings accumulated, investments made, futures secured through strategic financial planning. In your shared room, Sarah counts her night's earnings one final time before hiding them away. The ritual is methodical, practiced, bills smoothed and arranged by denomination, coins stacked in neat piles. $18, she murmurs, satisfaction evident in her voice. "Another month like this, and I'll have enough." "For the dress shop?" you ask, remembering her mentioned dream. "Maybe," she replies, suddenly hesitant. Or maybe just a ticket east. Sometimes I think about going home. This ambivalence about financial goals was common. Some women saved for specific business ventures, others for simple escape, still others with only vague notions of enough to leave the life behind. What united them was the underlying recognition that money represented the only reliable path out of prostitution. How much is enough, you ask, genuinely curious. Sarah considers this seriously. 500 would do it. Enough for a ticket, decent clothes, and a little to get established somewhere new, where nobody knows what I was. $500. A substantial sum in the 1870s, equivalent to perhaps a year's wages for a skilled male worker. For a successful brothel worker, it represented several months of aggressive saving, attainable but requiring discipline and luck. You'll get there, you assure her. Hope so, she replies, stifling a yawn as she settles into bed. Better than ending up like Sal. Sal, woman who worked here before you, spent everything she made. When she got too old for this place, ended up in the cribs down by the mines. Last I heard, she was drinking herself to death on whatever she could earn from the poorest miners. This cautionary tale, the fate of those who failed to plan for inevitable decline, was part of brothel folklore, a grim reminder of the economic precipice on which all sex workers stood. Outside, the mining town is coming fully awake as you prepare for sleep. The stamp mills that crush ore run continuously, their rhythmic pounding a constant backdrop to life in Virginia City. That sound represents the economic engine that drives the entire community, the extraction of silver that brings men, money, and the demand for services, including those offered at the Silver Queen. As you drift towards sleep, your mind catalogues the complex economic web revealed in just one day at the brothel, the formal accounting with its precise divisions of income and expense, the investment strategies of a madam building her business empire, the individual financial goals of women trying to secure futures beyond the sporting life, the daily negotiations that translate desire into dollars, the community connections that link the brothel economy to the wider commercial world. The Wild West brothel was many things, a social institution, a health hazard, a moral flashpoint, but it was always, fundamentally, a business. The women who worked in these establishments were entrepreneurs operating within severe constraints, using the limited options available to them to maximize earnings, minimize risks, and, when possible, build pathways to different futures. Sleep comes easily after the long night's work, your body settling into the lumpy mattress that represents both your current reality and the stepping stone to whatever comes next. Your last conscious thought is a simple calculation. How many nights like this one would it take to save your own $500? How long until you too might have options beyond these walls? The answer follows you into dreams not of romance or adventure, but of ledger books, carefully counted coins, and the distant promise of economic freedom. The afternoon sunlight filters through lace curtains that have seen better days, casting dappled patterns across the worn floorboards of the Silver Queen. It's been 3 months since you first walked through these doors, 3 months of learning the rhythms and rules of brothel life. Now, as you sit by the window, darning a torn stocking, you find yourself contemplating not just your daily routine, but the longer arc of life in the sporting trade and the various ways women found their way out of it. "Letter for you, Sarah," Jim announces, appearing at the doorway with a single envelope. Sarah takes it with carefully controlled eagerness, her fingers tracing the return address before she tucks it away unopened. "Thanks," she says simply, but the single word carries weight. "Good news?" you ask, once Jim has gone. "Hope so," she replies. "It's from my cousin in San Francisco. She's the one helping me look for a place to rent, for the dress shop." Sarah's planned exit from brothel life, saving to establish a legitimate business, represents one of the more successful paths women followed. Unlike factory work or domestic service, which paid barely subsistence wages, skilled trades like dressmaking offered both respectability and potential prosperity. "Got the last $50 last night," she adds, her voice low though there's no one else in the room. $520 total, enough to make the move, rent a small place, buy supplies. This milestone, reaching a savings goal that makes escape possible, was one many brothel workers aspired to, but relatively few achieved. Between house fees, living expenses, costs of required finery, and the ever-present temptations of alcohol and laudanum, saving substantial sums required uncommon discipline. "When will you go?" you ask, realizing with a pang that you'll miss her steady presence. "End of the month if the letter says she's found a suitable place." Sarah's expression is complicated, hope mingled with uncertainty. Madame Rosie already knows, said she'd have a goodbye party. This too was part of brothel tradition, acknowledging departures that ended on good terms with celebration rather than recrimination. Madams like Rosie, who took a longer view of their business, understood that maintaining positive relationships with former employees created a network of contacts and referrals that benefited everyone. "What about you?" Sarah asks. "Still planning to stay the year?" You nod, having settled on this time frame as your own goal. A year to learn the business, establish regular customers, and save enough to consider other options. 3 months down, 9 to go. Smart, she approves. First year's the hardest. Gets easier once you know who's who and have regulars who ask for you. The conversation is interrupted by sounds from upstairs. Mary, fully recovered from her illness, laughing at something Jenny has said. Her return to health represents another facet of brothel life, the resilience that allowed women to bounce back from setbacks that might have destroyed them in other circumstances. "Remember that woman who came through last week?" Sarah asks, changing the subject. "The one selling fabric samples?" You nod, recalling the middle-aged woman who had stopped at the Silver Queen, ostensibly as a travelling saleswoman, but clearly comfortable in surroundings that would have scandalised most respectable ladies. "Used to work for Madame Rosie 10 years ago," Sarah reveals. "Now she's got her own business, travels all over the West. Even has a Chinese man who works for her, carries her trunks and samples." This revelation highlights another potential legacy of brothel life, the business skills and confidence gained through years in a demanding profession. Women who succeeded in navigating the complex social and economic terrain of prostitution often developed capabilities that transferred surprisingly well to legitimate enterprise. "Rosie's got at least 4 former girls who've gone straight," Sarah continues, keeps track of them, helps them get started. That millinery shop she invested in, run by a woman who worked here 5 years before opening it. This network of former prostitutes establishing themselves in conventional businesses created a hidden economic pipeline, channeling money and opportunities among women who shared a common past but sought different futures. The front door opens, admitting Madame Rosie herself, returning from errands in town. Her expression is thunderous as she stamps snow from her boots. Winter has come early to Virginia City, adding another layer of challenge to daily life. "Everything all right?" you ask as she enters the sitting room. "That damned temperance society," she fumes, removing her heavy coat. "They're pushing a petition to close all establishments on D&E streets. The Silver Queen stands on E Street, squarely in the target zone. This cycle of moral crusades, led typically by the wives of the same men who frequented brothels, was a constant in Western communities. Periods of tolerance alternated with crackdowns, usually depending on the economic conditions and political climate of the moment." They'll never get it through, Sarah says with confidence born of experience. Too many businesses depend on us, and half the town council are customers. Maybe, Madame Rosie concedes, her anger fading to resignation. But it's a reminder not to get too comfortable. This business has always been about adapting or dying. This perspective, seeing prostitution as a constantly evolving enterprise rather than a fixed institution, characterized the most successful madams. They anticipated social changes, diversified their investments, and prepared contingency plans for the inevitable periods of persecution. Which reminds me, she continues, her mood lightening slightly. Got news about Josephine. The name clearly means something to Sarah, who perks up with interest. She finally did it? Moved to St. Louis? Better, Madame Rosie says with evident satisfaction. Married that cattle broker who'd been sweet on her for years. He bought her a house in Denver, right on Quality Hill, respectable as can be. Marriage represented another exit path from brothel life, though a rare one. While many customers might develop attachments to particular women, few were willing to overcome the social stigma attached to marrying a former prostitute. Those who did were often men with their own unconventional backgrounds or limited social standing to lose. Never thought she'd get out that way, Sarah muses. Always figured she'd buy that restaurant she talked about. Life surprises you sometimes, Madame Rosie says, settling into her favourite chair by the stove. That's why I always tell you girls to keep your options open. As if on cue, Mary appears on the stairs, a newspaper in hand. Look at this, she says, spreading it open to reveal an advertisement circled in pencil. Lady Barber wanted in Carson City, says they'll train suitable applicants. This novel opportunity, women's barbering being a relatively new and somewhat controversial occupation, generates immediate discussion. The women gather around, examining the advertisement with the keen interest of those always alert for potential escape routes. Pays not great to start, Lily observes critically. But it says room and board included during training. And you'd be working with respectable folks, Jenny adds, not having to pretend you're something you're not. This aspect, the psychological toll of living a double life, was a significant factor driving women to seek exits from prostitution even when the financial rewards remained superior to most alternatives. The constant pretense, the social rejection, the necessity of creating and maintaining false identities, all wore heavily over time. I might write to them, Mary decides, folding the paper carefully. After I've saved a bit more, always did have a steady hand. These moments of contemplating alternative futures were common in the quieter hours of brothel life. While popular imagination painted prostitutes as either fallen women beyond redemption or victims awaiting rescue, the reality was far more nuanced. Women actively planning and working towards self-directed transitions when circumstances permitted. As evening approaches, the daily transformation of the Silver Queen begins. Lamps are lit, the piano tuned, glasses arranged behind the bar in neat rows. The women retire upstairs to prepare for the night ahead, changing into the more elaborate costumes expected by customers. In the room you share with Sarah, she finally opens her letter, reading it silently before looking up with an expression of controlled excitement. She found a place, she says simply. Small, but on a decent street. Previous tenant was a seamstress too, so it's already set up for the work. That's wonderful, you reply, genuinely happy for her while feeling the impending loss of her companionship. I'll write back tomorrow to confirm, she continues, tucking the letter away carefully. Then give Madame Rosie my notice. 2 weeks should be enough time to find a replacement. the brothel economy adapted quickly to departures, with new women constantly entering the profession as others left it. The faces changed, but the institution remained, fulfilling its economic and social function in communities where men vastly outnumbered women. "You missed, Yuche," you tell her, helping her with the buttons of her evening dress, a deep blue satin that complements her fair complexion. "You'll be fine," she assures you, "and who knows, maybe in a year you can come to San Francisco too. I'll need help in the shop eventually." This suggestion, maintaining connections beyond brothel life, highlights another legacy of the profession. Women who shared the experience of prostitution often formed lasting bonds, creating informal support networks that extended long after their working relationships ended. "Maybe I will," you agree, the possibility both appealing and seemingly distant. The evening progresses with familiar routine, drinks served, conversations maintained, business transacted with the practiced efficiency that comes from repetition. But tonight you observe everything with new awareness, seeing not just the immediate exchanges but the longer trajectories they represent. Near midnight, an unusual visitor arrives, an elderly woman, elegantly dressed but clearly uncomfortable in the brothel setting. She asks specifically for Madame Rosie, who receives her with evident surprise. "Mrs. Langford," she greets the visitor, "this is unexpected." The old woman gets straight to business. "I've come about my grandson," she says stiffly. "I have reason to believe he's been spending his inheritance here." Rather than defensiveness or denial, Madame Rosie responds with professional courtesy. "Let's discuss this privately," she suggests, leading the woman to her office at the back of the building. When they emerge half an hour later, the atmosphere between them has changed subtly. Not friendship exactly, but a kind of grudging mutual respect. "Thank you for your discretion in this matter," Mrs. Langford says formally as she prepares to leave. "Of course," Madame Rosie replies. "Family concerns are always delicate." After the visitor departs, Madame Rosie explains the situation to the curious women. Her grandson's been spending too freely here. She's worried he'll go through his father's legacy before he's properly established in business. "We've come to an arrangement. He'll still be welcome, but with limits on his credit." This negotiation between the formal and informal economies, between socially opposed but practically connected women, exemplifies the complex role brothels played in Western communities. They existed both outside respectable society and intimately connected to it, serving as sites where otherwise rigid social boundaries became temporarily permeable. "Never thought I'd see old Lady Langford in a place like this," Lily marvels. "Her husband was a church deacon." "Everyone has their breaking point," Madame Rosie observes sagely. "Hers was watching family money flow into my pockets instead of her own. The night deepens, customers come and go, business continues, yet beneath the seemingly unchanging routines, currents of transition are clearly visible. Sarah planning her departure, Mary considering a new profession, Madame Rosie negotiating the shifting social terrain that threatens and sustains her business in equal measure. After the last customer has gone and the doors are locked for the night, the women gather briefly in the kitchen for a late meal. These informal gatherings, away from customer eyes, were where the real community of the brothel revealed itself, women supporting each other through the challenges of a difficult profession. "To Sarah," Lily proposes, raising a glass, "may your needles be sharp and your customers pay promptly." "To Sarah," everyone echoes, celebrating her impending escape while acknowledging their own continued residence in the life she's leaving. "I'll write," Sarah promises, "let you know how things go, and we'll visit when we can," Jenny adds. "If we're ever in San Francisco." These connections, maintained across geographical distance and social boundaries, formed another legacy of brothel life. Women who shared this experience often remained linked throughout their lives, providing mutual aid and understanding that those outside the profession couldn't offer. As the gathering breaks up and everyone heads to bed, exhausted from the night's work, you find yourself contemplating the various paths women took out of prostitution, some successful, others tragic, many falling somewhere in between. There was the business route, like Sarah's planned dress shop or Madame Rosie's real estate investments. There was marriage, rare but occasionally genuine. There was family reconciliation, with women returning to homes they'd left under various circumstances. There was geographical escape, moving to places where one's past remained unknown, starting fresh with carefully constructed identities. And there were the less fortunate outcomes, the descent from higher-class establishments to cribs and street walking as youth faded, the slow decline through alcohol and opium addiction, the early deaths from disease, violence or suicide that claimed so many in the profession. In your shared room, Sarah packs a small valise with personal items, not for immediate departure, but in preparation for it. The sight is both encouraging and unsettling, a reminder that transitions out of brothel life were both possible and precarious. Nervous? You ask, watching her carefully fold a daguerreotype of her family into a handkerchief. Terrified, she admits with surprising candour. Been 7 years since I lived any other way. Sometimes I wonder if I even remember how normal people act. This concern, the fear of being permanently marked by prostitution, unable to reintegrate into conventional society, haunted many women contemplating exit. The psychological legacy of the sporting life often proved more difficult to escape than its physical circumstances. "You'll be fine," you assure her, echoing her earlier encouragement to you. "You've always been the sensible one, and you've got real skills." "Hope so," she says, closing the valise and sliding it under her bed. "Guess I'll find out soon enough." Outside, snow falls gently on Virginia City, muffling the sounds of the mining operations that run day and night. The winter landscape transforms the rough-edged town into something almost beautiful, covering its scars and blemishes with pristine white. "Ever wonder what people will remember about places like this?" Sarah asks suddenly, gesturing vaguely to encompass the brothel. 100 years from now, I mean. It's an unexpected philosophical turn, but not inappropriate for this moment of transition. "I don't know," you answer honestly. "Maybe nothing. Maybe they'll forget we were ever here. Or maybe they'll make up stories," she suggests. "Turn us all into saints or sinners, nothing in between." This intuition that history would struggle to capture the complex reality of women in the sporting life proved remarkably accurate. The legacy of Wild West prostitution would indeed be contested territory, with narratives ranging from romantic glorification to moral condemnation, rarely capturing the pragmatic middle ground where most brothel workers actually lived. "We were just people," Sarah says softly, already speaking of herself in the past tense as she prepares to leave this identity behind. Just women trying to get by, same as anyone. This simple truth, the essential humanity of women whom history would often reduce to stereotypes, stands as perhaps the most important legacy of brothel life. Behind the labels of soiled doves or fallen women were individuals making difficult choices in challenging circumstances, crafting lives of meaning and purpose despite significant constraints. As you finally settle into bed, physically exhausted but mentally alert, you find yourself taking inventory of the brothel's legacies, both societal and personal. The economic contributions that built schools, churches, and businesses, the social networks that supported women within and beyond the profession, the skills and resilience developed through navigation of a dangerous occupation, the hidden influence on everything from fashion to language to social mores. And on a more intimate level, the individual legacies of women like Sarah preparing to carry her brothel-earned capital and skills into a new life. Like Mary, considering a transition to a novel occupation that didn't exist a generation earlier. Like Madame Rosie, building a business empire that would outlast her years in the sporting life. Sleep begins to claim you at last, your thoughts growing hazy as your body surrenders to well-earned rest. Through the window you can see snow still falling, each flake unique and ephemeral, much like the countless women who passed through brothels across the West, briefly visible before disappearing into the greater landscape of history. Their stories, like yours, were neither as romantic as fiction would later paint them, nor as sordid as moralists claimed. They were human stories, complex, contradictory, and ultimately familiar in their basic aspirations for security, connection, and purpose. As consciousness fades, your awareness of the hard mattress beneath you and the cold air on your face merges with appreciation for your own warm, comfortable bed at home. The contrast between then and now, between the harsh realities of Wild West brothel life and the security of your contemporary existence, brings a wave of gratitude. Those women of the sporting life, with their pragmatic approach to survival, their community building in adverse circumstances, their economic ingenuity when most paths were closed to them, left legacies both acknowledged and hidden in the society that emerged from the American frontier. They were entrepreneurs when women weren't supposed to understand business. They were independent when female independence was discouraged. They created communities when society denied them respectable membership. They survived and sometimes thrived in a world designed for their exploitation. Their legacy lives in unexpected places, in Western towns built partly with brothel profits, in businesses established with money earned in the sporting life, in social service organizations originally funded by madams, in family lines continuing from children born to prostitutes who found ways to provide for them. And perhaps most significantly, their legacy lives in the expanded understanding of women's capabilities that emerged, however reluctantly, from recognition of what they accomplished despite overwhelming obstacles. As you finally drift into sleep, your last conscious thought is of Sarah packing her valise, preparing for transition from one life to another, carrying with her not just the financial capital earned through years in the brothel, but the less tangible assets of confidence, resilience, and hard-won wisdom. In that quiet image of determined transformation lies the true legacy of countless women whose names history never recorded, whose stories were too ordinary to become legend, yet whose collective experience helped shape the West in ways both visible and invisible to those who came after. Sleep well, knowing that their stories, though often overlooked, remain woven into the complex fabric of American history, a testament to human adaptability, courage, and the universal desire for a better tomorrow.